I want to talk a little bit about HDR and black and white. This is a great thing that I started playing around with, and I gotta tell you, it's one of those things that now is my new favorite thing to do, and I'm kind of experimenting with this more and more. So I've spent all this time doing HDR to be able to write this book, but this is the one that I've kind of left with and gone, you know what, I'm gonna play with this thing a little bit further. So let me explain to you the overall concept of what it is that we were doing here. So I have a series of images that I did, right? These are my metered images of convict lake. These are my images that are overexposed, and these are my images that are underexposed. Now, I took all of those together and I merged them in HDR, right? So what I did was went in here, went into export, went to Photomatics, and I made a really, really exaggerated cut out of all of these. More often than not, when people turn around and they take a look at images with HDR, they tend to not want to play with the fake part of things. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, I want it to be real. I want it to be surreal. I want it to be real. You know, I want it to be natural. And sometimes HDR does a really, really super crazy thing to them, and that doesn't look very, very good. So I sat there and I played with this and I said, all right, well, this could be more of a naturalistic HDR. I can get that. I can get behind that. But what if I did this? And I brought the smoothing all the way out, and all of the rules that people used for bad HDR, I started playing with them, right? So I did this, I brought my gamma there, I changed this like this, so you get some big glowing areas, you know, brought this all the way down, and just really started making with what everybody would think would just be a bad HDR image. Right? If I did that, you know, normally I wouldn't save this as an HDR that I would want to use. But what's happening here is that the software is turning around and taking a look at all of this stuff, and it's saying, all right, well, I think this area needs to be processed like this in HDR. I think this area needs to be processed like this. I think this area needs to be processed like this. And it's finding a whole bunch of different areas, and it says, all right, let's do this for this, let's do this for this, let's do this for this. And it's selectively making these changes that together make a mess. Hold on to the selective expose here, selective expose here. That's where it's going to get really cool. Because what I did was I came up with this. Right? So that was the softer version of what we made. I said, all right, well, that looks great. Maybe there's one thing that I don't like about what it did, which is this haloing thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to command click one of my other base layers, and I'll right click and I'll edit this as layers inside of Photoshop. It'll take these two images, and this is going to be a 10-second fix for me to be able to set up, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the HDR version of this image, and using my quick mask, I'll go ahead and I'll just select this background. Having that set, I can go ahead and I can just hide that by holding down the Option key and clicking on the mask. So now I have this really whacked out HDR with this smooth sky. The great part about all of this is that when the HDR program said expose like this, this part, expose like this part, expose like this part, what it was doing is it was just making calculations on exposures based on a specific area. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a lot in the way Ansel Adams did calculations of specific areas, specific zones, and exposed for those areas. And I'm like, well, this could be at least a tip of the hat to Ansel Adams. I think it would be kind of cool. I said, what if we turn this into a black and white? Well, all right, let's play with that. I'm going to go over here to the black and white filter, click on that, and it looks okay. But as you start really going into these areas and pushing and pulling, just clicking on this checkbox and coming over here, you can start seeing some really, really interesting work now take form with how those exposures were blended together. So something that you normally would just see as a regular HDR image that's just crazy can actually be blended and have a really nice effect in the world of black and white. Now, the best way for me to be able to do this, and it's a paid software, but I absolutely adore it, is Silver Effects Pro from Nik Software. You can do these adjustments in Photoshop to be able to play with that, but I just love what I was getting out of what I was doing in this piece of software. So take a look. If I come over here and I would just get something that looks like it's high contrasty, you can get this kind of effect. If I want to be able to take a look at high structure, I can take a look at this kind of effect. Right? If I want to be able to take a look at low key, I almost always shoot low key. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things that I do. But I can come over here to my global adjustments and I can increase my structure to be able to get some contrast into these areas. I'm going to drop that just a hair and I'm going to click on OK. So now the important part isn't necessarily the software. I mean, obviously I love the Silver FX Pro side of it. You can do something similar to that by using a black and white layer and then going in and just adjusting some curves. But the point with all of it is that once you start doing this and you start tone mapping in a really, really crazy way, remapping that into a black and white world is actually something that can really open up a door to something that can be a new creation.